All right, in this demonstration, I want to show you how you can use the include function in PHP to make your website more modular so that it has template pieces and parts. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure, first of all, that you have your web host turned on for your local computer. So I've got my Apache web server running, and if you don't, you need to get it started. Otherwise, what you're doing right now is just not going to work. So unless you're using a remote server. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is go into my htdocs folder, and I had gotten everything to work with a mobile JavaScript or jQuery menu in this folder called project1-js. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this so that I don't mess that up. If there's something that I don't like about what I've done, I can always go back to my previous version. I've mentioned this before. And so instead of copy, I'm going to put dash includes. Okay, and so that means that this will be my next version, my next step. You can call these whatever you want so that it makes sense to you. So I'm going to go inside of this folder, and this is the template that I'm going to open. So I'm going to double click that and go into Dreamweaver. This should look reasonably familiar to you. Now, the thing that I'm going to do here is take a peek at how all of my code base is, and you'll see that I've got this really long page, not really long, it's just a long page. And so far what I have at the bottom is I've got, this footer right here, and it goes all the way down to the ending of the HTML tag. And I also have something that I feel like that's going to be common, the footer stuff is going to be common to every page. And then also common to every page would be, let's say, like from the body tag all the way up to the doc type. So these are the things that essentially are not going to change from page to page. And if we were to go into the web browser to take a peek, here, let me do a refresh. So we can go here to where it's the includes, and I can click on this template page. What you'll see is that we have this page where, in theory, we have a global navigation set up here, and that wouldn't change. You'd want this to be the same on every single page. And same is true of the footer, right? You want all of these things to stay pretty consistent. It helps with usability. It helps with, the ability for users to, navigate and figure out where they are and so on. Now, one of the questions you might have is like, well, wait a second, you said that nothing will change up here. Obviously, this would change, the title of the tab would change, or the title of the page would change. Those things would change. So, but the thing is, we can actually write dynamic scripts that will, go and find maybe the name of the page or the name of the file. We can have a file system where our naming convention essentially works in such a way that it also will allow us to run some filters on this name, maybe strip the file extension off of it, get rid of any kind of dashes, things like that, capitalize the file name, whatever, turn dashes into spaces, that kind of thing, and then populate, something up here, like in this case, it would be like the page ID H2, for instance. The other thing too that you can, do with that is, of course, you could use that as a name for an ID or a style, so that if you wanted some of the pages to have their own unique color system, or maybe some of the pages are even going to get a completely different style sheet. So for instance, if you were to, let's go here, let's take a look at the way that this inspector setup is, and to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that we might like actually want to grab. So if we were trying to load like the top part of the page that's always going to be identical, probably what we'd be looking at would be, like all the way down at least through the banner area. So what we could do, right, is we could look at getting the doc type, obviously the HTML beginning tag, probably the entire head, well, definitely the entire head, because it's where we load our style sheets and stuff. That way we would only have to have it in one place, and if we ever needed to change something really important, we would only have to change it in one place, which is really good. And you might look at this and go, wait a second, the title is something that would be different for different pages. This could contain a conditional script that changes the title name based on, say, I was saying before, like the name of the actual page itself, right? Like if it were about -us, we could run a script that filters it and turns the dashes into spaces and capitalizes the A and the U, and so then we'd have something that said about us or whatever, right? And then you would also want the body, and the other thing that you could do, in the body, for instance, is like you can imagine that we would have something that would like have an ID, right? So that we would have a special ID on that body, we'd know what page it is, and then a conditional script could load what page it was. And so, it could, let's pretend like the name of this page was about -us, we could have it run some script that ends up giving us this as the information. And then we would have, this as an ancestor to work with, and everything below that could be different in the About Us page, if you really wanted to, right? And then obviously you would want the whole section whose ID is banner, because that navigation's not going to change. It's supposed to be global for a reason. It's supposed to be predictable. So you could take it like all the way down to the end of the section, and then technically you wouldn't have to also include this part where it says, section, and then has the article in the first header with the H1. You might not want to do that because maybe there's some pages that you'd want to look really different. There are ways that up here inside of the head that we can also pass some variables that will allow us to pass those variables like down into the page and use them as well, like so that we could populate the title of this H1 or something. So it could be the name of the page, whatever, right? There are lots of different ways we can do this. So it's pretty cool. And the thing is that you might look at this and go, why would I want to do that? Well, the reason you do that is, imagine if you had like hundreds of pages, or even, tens of 20, 30, whatever pages. This is something that's nice because it gives you a global control in the main template pieces of your files, so that when you need to change something, update it, whatever, it'll, you just go to one place and it cascades through the entire site, which is great. And you should get used to this, because all major content management systems that are out there exist on this principle, either using PHP or JSP or ASP or something, some kind of dynamic scripting language that is going to auto-generate pieces and parts and help you figure out how to assemble a page together, right? Okay, so let's go over to our code editor and let's take a look here. So this is the page that we've got. So what I want to do here is I want to take everything from my doc type, and let's go all the way down and let's get to the banner. Okay, and so I'm going to copy all the way down to the end of that section that is the banner, okay? And I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard, and I'm going to go up here and say new file, and it's going to be a PHP file. And make sure that you don't choose this one that's down here at the bottom where it says PHP template. Don't choose that one, because that one wants to make editable regions and things like that. So we're going to choose just regular PHP. All right, hit create. And I don't need any of the stuff that's here, so I'm going to delete that and paste what is in my clipboard. Okay, and everything that should be in your clipboard is like doc type all the way down to the ending of the banner ID section. All right, so, and then you want to save. Let's go ahead and make sure that we're saving it in the right place. And for some reason, it's not doing that. I didn't define my site in Dreamweaver, which I probably should have done. So if I go up here to where it says includes, okay. And then I'm going to create a new folder inside of my root level folder, and I'm going to call it includes. You could also call it like assets or whatever you want, but I'm going to call it includes. It's a really normal name of a folder for PHP websites. So I'm going to go ahead and create that includes folder, and then I'm going to call this, all right, it's the top of the page. So you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and call mine head.inc.php. Okay, and here's the thing. When I say head, I don't want you to get confused and think that it's just like the HTML tag of head, okay? I don't like to call it header because then sometimes students will get confused and they think that I just mean this banner area. But I also don't want you to get confused by me calling it head. If that's confusing to you, you can call it like top, you can call it whatever you want, okay? The main thing is that you just keep it straight what you're going to call it. And the other thing too is whenever I put the .inc inside of here, that's a really common nomenclature for PHP sites whenever they're using included files. And so I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. You don't have to if you don't want to, whatever is easiest for you. I'm going to go ahead and call mine head.inc.php though, okay? Okay, so now that's saved. And what's kind of cool is if I were to come over here, all right, and I were to just delete that section that I just copied and pasted into another file, so I'm just going to delete that. All right, what I can do now is I can put in a pair of PHP tags, okay, or opening and closing tags, and then I'm just going to say include, right, and I like to put my syntax here, and then include, and then I'm going to look for the file that I need to pull in. And so the file that I need to pull in, and this is where you might get confused, I want to make sure you understand, the path is going to be relevant to the file that I'm currently in right now, which is template.php. Okay, so let's take a really quick peek at the paths. So we are in the project one includes. All right, and then the file that I'm currently putting the include function in is right here called template.php. And the pathway, if I were to call the file that I'm looking for, the pathway is includes /head.inc.php. Okay, just want to make sure that you understand that. Okay, so we're going to type that includes /head.inc.php. All right, so I want to just save this really quickly. And let's do a test and make sure that everything shows up the way that we expect it to. Let's go back in here, and what I can, I'm going to close this, make sure that I am using the right page. It's this one that's in the includes folder, the template page. I'm going to hit return, and sure enough, everything is still up here like it's supposed to be. Just in case, I'll do a shift hard refresh on the page to make sure that it actually loads right. And everything is up here. Everything is still functional. I still have my menu, right? Everything is working. Pretty cool, okay? And then if I do an inspection, it looks identical to the way that it was before. And that's because the way that this include function works, if you remember back to one of the other lessons that you should have actually watched already, sorry, there we go, is that whenever it calls something using the include function, is that it's going to announce whatever is in that file right here, right there. It's going to basically echo it to the browser. There's some other ways that you can do stuff, like for instance, if I were inside of this head inc PHP file and it didn't have all this HTML, let's say that it just had some stuff that was like storing values into variables, well, I could still use that, but I'd have to use it in a different way. But because this is stuff that prints directly straight to the browser, right, sort of like straight out of my mouth so that other people can hear it, right, without any kind of filter, then it gets announced in the same way straight out of my mouth right here, gets spoken straight out of the browser to the viewer. So the code gets printed right here, right there. Okay, so I think that that's really useful to know. Okay, let's also look at something really quickly. I want to show you something that just happened now. Whenever I did that, if I am over in my template file, and then you see what happened when I was in my template file before. Up here it showed my asset files as being like my CSS, and it did also have my jQuery, right? But that's also because jQuery, don't forget, is down here at the bottom. That's where it's being called in. Okay, but it did have my CSS. Well, it's not there anymore, and instead it's this head.inc.php file. Okay, I'm going to actually show you over here. Let me so that you don't get confused, notice that I have my actual head.inc.php file open in a different tab. Okay, so don't get confused between the way that this is open, seeing a new tab, versus this template is my source code over here, and it's seeing head.inc.php as an asset. Okay, so don't get confused by that if I start clicking around. All right, so this is the way it's supposed to look. If you're using Dreamweaver, I don't want you to get confused, okay? So while you're in that file, that parent file, I'm going to refer to it as the parent file. Right now it's template.php, but it's the parent file that is calling out the include. And because of that, it sees that file as an asset, which it shows it right here as an asset, okay? Now, the only reason that this jQuery is still even showing up as the jQuery CDN is because it's all the way down at the bottom of the page, and see, this is being called from a network, all right? So that's why it took a minute for it to load all this information. It's being called from the network because it's a network resource, and you see here if I hover it, it shows it as HTTPS, blah, 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 right? But if I go back to my source code, you'll see why, and the reason is because, if it'll load, okay, there it goes, is because I have not yet pulled out all of the stuff for the footer, which is going to go in its own include file. All right, and then once I do that, this jQuery will disappear and it'll say something like, you know, footer.inc.php, right, as an included asset. So now, the thing is that if I were to actually go and open that separate file, this one called head.inc.php, right, if I look at the source code, this is the source code right here on the left, which we already know what that is. It's the whole beginning of that page that we copied and pasted, right? But it sees that there is actually CSS attached to it, the reset file and the styles. And so here it's actually going to show you those different things. And here it's like saying, hey, it's not on a local disk. It's really confused. It sees that it's calling this out, but it thinks that it can't find the thing, so don't like try to relink it or something, okay? And you see it's not loading the styles. That's okay. The reason that it's not, and let me show you, and this is always confusing to people at first, is that include file, okay, is right here in terms of where it's located in its file system. It's actually in a folder called includes, right? And then if we were to just in Dreamweaver, just open up this head.inc.php file outside of its environment, which it's really intended for, which is, you know, to be pulled into the template file. If we just open this up, well, of course, the links to the CSS are not available, because if you were to look at the links to the CSS, let's look at that source code, all it's doing is it's saying, okay, here, let's actually get out of the design view and go to just code view. What it's doing is it's looking for just reset.css, which would mean that because there's no leading path, you know, before it, there's no folder before it. Same is true with styles.css. It thinks it's in the exact same folder as the file that we're currently looking at, which is head.inc.php. And so if you look inside of, if you look at head.inc.php in, you know, in the file system, you see that it's in a folder called includes, and it thinks that styles and reset should also be inside of includes, but it shouldn't, okay? Make sure you don't get confused and go, oh, well, those need to now get moved inside of includes. That's not the case. And the reason why is because if you go over here to template, whenever an include is called into a file, as it is here on line 1, what is happening is that it pulls the contents of that other file into this file as if it is natively part of this file. And so that means that the pathways that it needs to have that are inside of this actual file and the text of the file that's being pulled in, it needs to be relevant to the pathways that would work for this parent file. Okay? That might sound really confusing to you. Feel free to stop this, rewind it, and listen to what I said again. It's really important that you understand this and not start just moving a bunch of stuff around. If that's really confusing, just go ahead here and close this header file, okay? Now, what really drives a lot of people crazy at this point is they feel like, oh, well, now I can't just easily use my clickable assets right up here for my CSS and stuff, I can't just like click on it and then move back and forth really easily. And yes, that's true. Dreamweaver doesn't understand unless you're using one of Dreamweaver's built-in functions that Adobe has created as part of its library. If you're just using traditional normal PHP stuff that isn't like one of their special functions that they've written that are honestly pretty convoluted and complicated and really messy, then it doesn't understand how to sort of dynamically link all of these different files together in a way that is easy for it to make sense to you. And so like, what you would then need to do is go and separately open up your style sheet if you wanted to always be able to jump back and forth and restyle stuff. So that might suggest to you right off the bat how useful it would be to try to get your styling as set up down pat as possible, without freaking out over it too much, but get your styling done as much as possible to the way that you think it's going to be before you start putting stuff inside of includes like this. If you're used to using this kind of IDE program where, you can just click on the linked assets easily and, jump back and forth, because once you pull the included stuff out and put it into another file like this, then the include becomes the asset that you click on here, and you can't easily just jump over to that style sheet by clicking up here, okay? That's just something that you need to know. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is pretty much the same thing with the footer. So let's go down to the very bottom, and we'll start with the HTML ending tag, and we'll kind of scroll up as we select, and I'm going to get all this JavaScript, and I'm going to get the footer, and let's keep going, keep going, keep going, and then I'm going to go ahead and just get all the way up to this footer, okay, the beginning of the footer tag. And I think I'm not going to get anything else because that content might all end up changing on the other pages. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put it into, and I'm not going to cut it yet. I'll get rid of it later, but right now I'm just going to copy and go to a new file, new PHP file. And the reason I'm not, I could technically probably do it as an HTML file, but at this point in time, but later I'm going to have PHP in it, so it has to be PHP. Anyway, so I'm going to paste that in there, and I've got everything that I need here, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and then we're going to call this, I'm going to put it in includes, and I'll call this footer, or I'll just call it foot, just to be consistent with what I did at the top, so head and foot .inc, and then the .php extension. We'll save that, and then we'll come back over here to template, and instead of having all of that there, I'm just going to hit delete, and then once again I'll do my PHP tags, and inside of that I'll say includes, or excuse me, include, and I'm going to show you something really quick. I'm going to go ahead and put foot.inc.php here. I'm going to hit save. And then we're going to go over and check this, and let's hit refresh. And then everything at the top looks okay. And if we scroll down to the bottom, look what happened. Okay, so I did this actually on purpose because this is eventually going to happen to you at some point. And what I don't want to have happen during this class is for you to just immediately see a warning and your brain shuts off and you just immediately give up and you go to Canvas or you go to your email and say, I don't know what to do, it's messed up. What I want you to do is I want you to actually look at the error message and see what it's telling you, okay? Actually read it. So here it's saying, hey, this is a warning, include, and it says foot.inc.php failed to open stream. No such file or directory in blah, blah, blah. And it tells me what the file name is that it's seeing the problem in. And it's telling me also the line number that it's finding it on. Sometimes the line number is accurate and sometimes it's not. In this particular case, it's actually accurate because it can't find this file. And you need to think about why can't it find the file. There are two probably most common reasons. One is that the file name is misspelled. Okay, it's not actually the file name. Or, if you're on a server that is case sensitive, most of your computers won't be case sensitive, but if you're on a server, it might be case sensitive. So like if you named your file name with a capital F for foot, but you typed a lowercase f, then that could be the problem. But the other more likely problem, if it's not a misspelling, is that you've got a problem with your pathways. So if you remember, if you look up here, what did we do? We were looking inside of the includes folder, okay? And we didn't put it here. And so those are two of the most common issues. You either leave off the wrong pathway ahead of it, or you've got the wrong pathway somehow, or you've got a misspelled file. If it ever says failed to open stream, no such file or directory, all right, it probably means that somehow there's something wrong with it. And if I save this and I go back and test it and I hit refresh, see, there's my footer. It found the file and now it's loading the contents of that file there. Now, every once in a while, just so you know, you might look here in your code and you might see something and you cannot for the life of you figure out what the heck is wrong. Okay, well, it also could be, you know, like you've got something wrong with quotes or whatever. But the other thing too is occasionally it's hard to figure out what's wrong in the actual code, but sometimes if you were to right click and inspect, sometimes that might help you troubleshoot. So like if something shows up as blank but it shouldn't, maybe there's a variable that's not passing the information properly, and so it's showing up as, you know, empty information or whatever. So there's some different ways for you to troubleshoot when you get these error messages. But anyway, now that's going to conclude the section about setting this file up, modularizing it with includes up to this point.